Exercise 12 Exercise 12 requires us to use the distributive property when we're solving out for the inequality. Now, there's two different ways to solve any inequality that includes the distributive property, and I'll show you both ways on the video. So the first way is the one that you're most familiar with, where you're going to take that number outside of the parentheses and you're going to distribute it into the numbers or the terms inside of the parentheses. So that 5 times the quantity of g plus 4 would turn into 5 times g plus 20, and we would set it greater than 15. Now, on this one, it becomes a two-step inequality after we get rid of the parentheses, and so you would just solve it like you do all other two-step inequalities. Take care of your addition subtraction first, and then your multiplication and division. But a different way of doing the same problem is that you can actually, instead of distributing that 5, you can get rid of that 5, or you can cancel it out to turn it into 1 first before distributing it without having to distribute it. So what you would do in that case is you would divide both sides by 5, and when you divide both sides by 5, that 5 that's outside of the parentheses is going to cancel out with the 5 you're dividing by and just leave you with g plus 4, which is going to be greater than 3 in that case. Now for this one, the only thing that you would have left to do is to subtract 4 from both sides, and you'd get that g is greater than -1, which is the same answer you would get if you solved the traditional way where we did the distributive property first. We would subtract 20 from both sides, which would leave us with 5g is greater than -15. I'm sorry, it's going to be greater than -5. And then you're going to divide 5 from both sides, and that leaves you with g is greater than -1. So you get the same answer, but two different ways of doing it. I prefer the second way of doing it, because when you get rid of the number outside of the parentheses first, if it's a fraction or a decimal, it makes the whole problem a lot easier. So in that case, after that, for exercise 12, you'd follow it up by graphing the solution. Exercise 13, I want you to try that new way that we just did. So for exercise 13, instead of distributing that number 4 into the w minus 6, I'd like for you to get rid of or cancel out that 4 and turn it into a 1. And remember, that's 4 times that quantity, and any number over itself will give you 1. And whatever you do to the left side, you have to do to the right side. So try that out, and you'll see that it actually is a lot simpler, especially when you start a problem like problem 14. So if we were to solve out question 13, what we would do here is we would divide both sides by 4. And in dividing both sides by 4, that 4 outside of the parentheses now cancels out to equal 1. And then we're left with w minus 6 is less than or equal to 3. But distributing that 1 to w minus 6, anything times 1 is just that same value. So really, you just end up with a w minus 6. That 1 that was outside is not really outside. And then following that, you would just do the one step that you would need in order to solve out the inequality, and that would give you your answer. For 14, exercise 14, this is the one where I'm saying it's going to be a lot easier to just get rid of the number outside of the parentheses first. So let me show you how to do that. So you've got -8 is less than or equal to 2/5 times the quantity of k minus 2. Now, what you could do is you could take that 2/5 and you could distribute it into k minus 2. But what you can do also instead is that you can get rid of that 2/5 first. How do you turn any fraction into the number 1? What do you have to multiply it by? Hopefully you're thinking reciprocal. And when you multiply that fraction by its reciprocal, it's going to get you to the 1 that you need outside of that parentheses, and going to leave you just with a quantity of k minus 2. The reciprocal of 2 over 5 is 5 over 2, which equals 10 over 10, which is just 1 whole. Now, if we multiplied the right side by 5 over 2, then you're also going to have to multiply the left side by 5 over 2. And then once you do that, you'll see that you've gotten rid of the fraction, and you're left with nothing but whole numbers, and then you can solve out for k without having to do any complicated fractions. Same thing goes for exercise 15. We got the same kind of problem where we have a fraction outside of the parentheses. Rather than distributing that fraction to inside of the parentheses, you can simply get rid of that fraction on the outside. You can multiply it by its reciprocal to get rid of it. Just recognize that that's a negative fraction on the outside, so if you multiply by a negative number in an inequality, you have to flip the sign. So just remembering to flip that sign is going to be really important for this particular problem, because that number you're going to multiply by is a negative number, and so you'll have to flip the sign of the inequality for it to still make sense. I'm going to do a similar example, not the same example, but I'm going to do something pretty close to the same thing. So if I had negative 1/3 times the quantity of d plus 1 is less than 6, then the way that I would start this question is I would want to get rid of that negative 1/3 first. So I would multiply negative 1/3 by its reciprocal, negative 3 over 1, which is really just multiplying by negative 3. And I would do that to both sides. And because I multiplied by a negative number, I'm going to also make sure that I flip the sign towards the end. So just right away, I'm going to skip all the other steps and make sure that I put that towards the end so I don't forget it. After doing that, that negative 3 times negative 1/3 is going to cancel out to leave us with a positive 1. And so the only thing we'll have left on the left side is not just d, but the d plus 1 quantity that was inside of the parentheses. And then on the right side, 6 times negative 3, that's going to be negative 18. Then lastly, to solve for the variable d, what we'll need to do is we'll need to subtract 1 from both sides. And then subtracting 1 from both sides is going to leave us a d is greater than, and then this is negative 18 minus 1, so not plus 1. So you should be thinking, if I'm at negative 18 on the number line, and I'm subtracting 1, I'm moving to the left, gives me negative 19. But remember, that's just the answer to my example. You're going to be using the same kind of techniques that I did here. I'll try to move it so you can see it a little better. Same kind of technique that we did here to solve my example, you're going to use to solve the exercise 15 problem.